Good afternoon. I extend my warm welcome to everyone who has joined the webinar, seventh in the series of Mongabay-India's Clean Energy Talks. In the crucial year of 2022, we are exploring India's energy transition journey from all possible perspectives. So far, we have discussed the journey from a gender perspective, employment, rooftop solar, electric vehicles, and few more. Today, we want to get into the geography of capacity addition and to explore what it reflects. When I said 2022 is crucial, I mean to say that it offers us an opportunity to look back and see how India achieved or reached closer to its first ambitious target of getting 175 gigawatt of renewable capacity addition. Building upon this learning can help the country to do the correction where it is needed. As per the latest data available, India has added 50,000 megawatt of solar capacity. I'm mentioning solar because it is the easily available renewable source in all states, and there has been extra push by the government as well. So out of total 50,000 megawatt of solar capacity, only states have added around 44,000 megawatt of solar, means around 88% of the total solar capacity India has. These states are Rajasthan, Karnataka, Gujarat, Madhya Pradesh, Maharashtra, Tamil Nadu, Telangana, and Andhra Pradesh. While in this 50,000 megawatt of capacity addition, Bihar has added just 190 megawatt, Jharkhand has added just 88 megawatt, West Bengal has added just 166 megawatt, and so on. Even Kerala has added 345 megawatt of solar capacity. Is it normal? Or does it indicate some deep-rooted problem India has? And so, how we are moving forward? If it is a problem, what could be the possible solution? And if it is not, what will be the possible future of India? How it will look like the energy sector? So these are the few questions we will discuss in this webinar. Uh, I will ask all the panelists to share their perspective first. And here I would like to share how the model we are going to conduct this webinar. Every expert will get 5 to 7 minutes to share their perspective about the subject. And then we will go in question answer. I'll ask question based on the perspective we have shared and what the question we feel like. And then we will take the question from audiences and to respond to that. So first off, before that, I would like to introduce our panelists. We have Dr. Devajit Palit, who is former director and senior fellow, Rural Energy and Livelihood Division, TERI, and vice president at Indian Association for Energy Economics. Palit has more than 25 years of experience working in the field of renewable energy, clean energy access, rural electrification, decentralized energy, mini-grids, energy gender poverty nexus, and water energy food nexus. He has been listed in the top 2% of world scientists for 2019-20 by Stanford University. At TERI, Palit completed several projects as principal investigator, team leader in the field of clean energy technology. He has also written widely on energy access and rural electrification issues, particularly on South Asia. We also have Professor K.S. Kavikumar, who is currently working as professor at Madras School of Economics. Kavikumar has more than 25 years of experience in research, teaching, and industry. He has been associated with various international and national institutions, including the World Bank, International Institute for Applied System Analysis, Potsdam Institute for Climate Impact Research, GIZ, British High Commission, Tata Energy Research Institute, Institute of Economic Growth, etc., for various research assignments. He has also coordinated the activities of the Center of Excellence in Environmental Economics supported by the Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change, Government of India. He has and continues to serve as a member of various committees of the Government of Tamil Nadu and Government of India. We have Dr. H.S.K. Nathan, who is an engineer turned development researcher. Associate professor at IRMA, he teaches and researches in the area of development theory, energy for sustainable development, public policy, and measuring development. As a part of civil society intervention through People's Foundation for Scientific Socio-Economic Development, he has been involved in education, health, and livelihood issues. Nathan's broad areas of interest lies in economic measurement, energy, sustainable use of resources, human development, and disarmament. In one of his co-authored works, Nathan proposed an alternative approach to measure human development index and conceived a novel method of assess energy poverty. And last but not least, we have Mr. S. Gopi Krishna Warrior, an experienced environmental journalist. He is presently the managing editor for Mongabay-India. He has written for the India Climate Dialogue, Nature India, Frontline Magazine, the News Minute, India Legal, the Times of India, the Hindu, and the Hindu Business Line. His pieces have also been published in the First Post and Forbes India. He had previously worked with the communication department of two international agriculture research organizations, ICRISAT and the Africa Rice Center in Benin in West Africa. He is the secretary of the Forum Environmental Journalists in India. In his stint with the panels South Asia, he worked with the media in Bangladesh, Bhutan, Nepal, Pakistan, and Sri Lanka to enhance journalists' understanding on climate change and biodiversity. He is also a member on the Commission of Education and Communication in the IUCN. I again welcome you all. I would begin the discussion with Kavi Kumar and request him to share his view on the subject. Professor, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Kundan, for this warm welcome. Greetings to all the fellow panelists and people attending this webinar. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm not an expert in energy issues, but I have some understanding of the climate change and the transition that we are talking about. So let me stick my neck out to say a few things with regard to the topic here, which is basically, are we being fair in our transition to the low carbon economy, especially for the energy poor states? And, I think the notion of just transition is very much ingrained in the climate change debate and discourse right now. And it's largely been confined to the mitigation side of the picture, mitigation policies. That's what essentially we're currently talking also. But I would like us to think a little broader than this. There is a larger issue under adaptation as well. And I hope many of you will agree with me that we should actually kind of nudge this discourse to go beyond the mitigation issues, even though, of course, our current topic is mitigation related. But I just wanted to plant this point first upfront that just transition is not just related to the mitigation policies and low carbon economy alone. It's more to do with even the transition from where we are currently and where we are likely to be under the climate change conditions, especially with regard to the adaptation aspects. And just to supplement what Mr. Kundan has mentioned about the energy sector scenario in the country, especially with the solar and wind as alternative fuels for the conventional fossil fuels, I think the large picture is fairly like we have a fairly large concentration of the coal plants, and the eastern part and west and south predominantly are getting more and more investments being made into the both solar and wind installations or investments. So that's a well documented information. But if you also look at the number of people employed in these respective sectors, coal and biomass actually occupy bulk. Coal almost as much as 800,000 people are employed in the coal sector, a variety of aspects, including the fuel supply, manufacturing part, O&M, everything put together. We have a huge, and in comparison, we are talking about pretty small numbers in currently solar and other other non-renewable renewable resources. So this scenario is going to change, obviously, if any serious dent we need to make with regard to the low carbon transition. But in terms of the potential also, we should keep a check on where is the potential. Of course, there is the investment is going on in these directions, but where exactly is the potential? Again, there are several natural factors in place. There is a slight edge. Definitely, there is a slight edge for the west and south with regard to the better radiation levels in the south and west that we observe, as well as land use classification, the way they exist currently in west and southern part of India compared to the eastern part. So there is a little bit of a natural edge for the west and south for making this renewable energies investments a little more cheaper than what they would be in the eastern side of the country. So obviously there is going to be transition that loaded against the east currently in economic terms. So there is going to be job losses and so on that we need to be worried about. But I think we need to ask ourselves a little larger question here, in my view, because the resource-rich states that we are talking about, especially these eastern states, have been resource-rich for a long time, and despite that, their developmental patterns have been pretty low to say to document. So there is a already existing injustice or inequity that we are talking about, and whether we need to be addressing that only through the energy transition we have as the window right now is a pertinent question to ask ourselves. Maybe there are other windows that we already missed, and probably we are overloading the current window of opportunity to correct all the historic errors. Maybe they're not right approach, because there is, as we said, there are economic reasons why you may want to actually make more investments in the western and southern part of India, and forcefully diverting those investments to the eastern side to correct your existing inequities may not be efficient so to say. So I think the larger point I'm trying to hint at is we should be actually asking ourselves why these inequities exist in the first place before even the window of opportunity from climate change and the low carbon transition appeared in front of us. What seems to be the reasons for that actually takes us back to the standard developmental story. So probably that is what we need to be addressing first without addressing those aspects, why these institutions are the way they are, why their developmental indicators are poorer than many other parts of the country. So that we should be first addressing rather than only looking at this. Of course, this could be an opportunity, but let us not overemphasize this is what I would like to argue, and that's where I will end. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Kumar, for sharing your perspective. You talked about the land use classification, better radiation, which gives an edge to western and southern part of India, and also the question why inequality exists itself. But the irony is it is, and it has been discussed for so years. So now I'll request Dr. Pali to share his perspective on this.
So you're on mute.
Thank you, Mr. Pandey. So let me at the outset thank Mongabay-India for organizing this particular webinar on a very important topic on is India's energy transition fair to the energy poor states. This one, Mr. Kavi Kumar rightly pointed out that it's first important to understand why many of these energy poor states are actually poor. This one, so that's a fundamental point that we need to answer first. But let me put some perspective using some figures. This one. So as far as the solar energy or the renewable energy in India is concerned, this one, and then we'll go to the more deep dive to the whether it is equitable or fairer to the to some of the states and not fairer to some of the states. So we had a about 10 gigawatt of capacity in 2010 when the National Solar Mission was launched. Around about 10 gigawatt, or maybe a little less than that. And in 2019-20, the figure increased to about 40 gigawatts. So that's roughly 4 times in 10 years. This one, roughly 4 gigawatt every year for the last 10 years. And we are aiming to reach about 300 gigawatt out of the total pie of 500 gigawatt by 2030. So that's roughly 40 gigawatt per year. So what we have achieved from 2010 to 2020 in 10 years time frame, we are now planning to achieve every year the same capacity, which in itself is something that is a very challenging task. Now it leads us to the point that it would need quadrupling of the current achievement or almost double of the generation infra in the next 10 years, what we have achieved in the last 70 years. So our total capacity is about 300, roughly around little less than 400 gigawatt. And in the next 10 years, or rather 8 years, we are going to achieve another 400 gigawatt because India has achieved about 100 gigawatt renewable energy capacity. So you can understand the scale of the challenge. And if I take the finances from the finance point of view, so whatever is being invested every year during the last 5 to 6 years in the renewable energy sector, we will need every year 2.5 times, at least 2.5 times of what is being invested. So you can understand. So if we're investing X rupees every year in the renewable energy sector, we need now 2.5X every year to be invested over a period over the next 8 to 10 years to achieve our target of 2030. And given the fact that most of the discoms are not profiting, and the distribution companies are the one who are going to purchase this electricity from the developer, these private developers, this one, and then sell it to the retail consumers or the industries and other. This one, and they are not in profit. So if they're not in profit, how they are going to purchase the electricity? And if they purchase also, are they going to pay to the developers? And if they don't pay, then will the developer have interest to investing in more money in the sector? Now, these are some broader challenges that we see at the macro level. Now, let me come to the micro level, why certain states are have been able to implement more renewable energy technologies than some of the other states. And mostly we see that states in the southern part of India or in the western part of India, including Rajasthan, Gujarat, Maharashtra, Karnataka, Andhra, Tamil Nadu. These are some of the states which are implementing solar energy or renewable energy at a much faster pace than what is being done by Odisha, Bihar, maybe Assam, West Bengal, UP, and others. Now, I feel there are a couple of reasons for that. There may be many reasons, but some of the reasons that I would highlight here is that I think many of the southern and western states have got an early mover advantage because they were the states where the wind energy resources are available. And as everybody would know, wind sector has started to grow from early 2000 or mid 2000. And many of these big companies like Suzlon and RE Power and others have been investing or putting up wind power plants in Rajasthan, Gujarat, Karnataka, Maharashtra, and other places. So the nodal agency or the state renewable energy development agency who are facilitating these wind power projects in these states, they had developed that expertise to deal with the private sector and get investment in their state. So they have understood the rules of the game, and probably that early mover advantage in the wind energy sector is also giving them advantage in the solar sector. This could be one of the reasons. Of course, Mr. Kavi Kumar mentioned about the fiscal, the developmental overall development that is happening in the southern and the western sector. Of course, that is also important. Another point is that what I have found based on my research work while I was undertaking my PhD work is that many of these states, these advanced states or the developed states within India, so they and those which are in the eastern part of India, the structure of the renewable energy development agencies differ from a legal structure point of view. Now, like the Electricity Act of 2003 asked all distribution companies to be structured as a corporate entities. The government can be the largest shareholder, but then they also have to be structured like a corporate organization. In case of the renewable energy development agencies, no such guidelines are provided by the central government when the Ministry of New and Renewable Energy was started way back in 1992. Now, resulting in that in a state like Assam, the State Renewable Energy Development Agency is registered as a society, whereas in a state like Rajasthan, it is registered as a corporation. So In some state, it is under the direct supervision of the Department of Energy. In some state, it is under the Department of Science and Technology. So there is a complete chaos as far as the structure is concerned and the department to whom they are reporting in these states. I have a strong feeling that if the structure would have been made as a corporate entity, so the way it has been done for the electricity distribution company, and similar structure would have been followed in almost all the states. This one with certain common guidelines being provided by the central government. Probably they would have been better empowered to take decisions and take forward the agenda of renewable energy in the states. In some states, you have a very vibrant state renewable energy development agency. In some states, you have only one officer who is managing the entire show, and there is no staff being allocated to them. So I think this is another point that probably needs to be taken care of. The third and the last point I would like to highlight here is that what I have found as far as rural electrification is concerned, and it's a very interesting finding that I found while doing my PhD, is that most of the states which are dependent on farming, like Punjab, Haryana, Maharashtra, Tamil Nadu, and all these states, the rural electrification figures or the progress in these states was much faster than states which were dependent on natural resources or mineral resources like Chhattisgarh, Odisha, Assam, West Bengal. I'm talking about the undivided Bihar. That means we are not this one. No. So all these states which were there were undivided till 2001. This one. So I tried to find out the figures and then found that the farming states are much progressive than the mineral-rich states. I don't know why. One of the reasons could be that in the farming states, because the rural electrification through pump set energization was done. So probably the farmers, the household electrification piggybacked on pump set energization, or it could be because of the pump set energization, the farmers could earn a lot of money and they could afford to have electricity, continuous electricity services in their households, and that's how the states developed. But then the farming states were found to be much better than the mineral-rich states. And probably in the renewable energy sector also the same thing is continuing, because it will take time for these states to reach to a point where they can compete with or where they can have similar progress like the southern or the western state. But having said that, I think I gave some numbers about quadrupling of the current achievement is required. And if we're to achieve all those numbers by 2030, I think equitable progress of deployment is extremely important. And if for that reason, if these energy poor states needs to be supported with better incentives, so be it. They have to be provided with such incentives. Otherwise, we are not going to achieve that 2030 target in the next 8 years, because equitable progress is extremely important. I will stop here. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. You shared quite like a good perspective. You can say, talk about the scale of the problem, like early mover advantage the states have, and the state institutions functioning as society or somewhere functioning as corporate. So I think it is quite good insight. Now I request Dr. Nathan to share his perspective, and will request him to please keep tab over the watch as well. You have 5 to 7 minutes.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. All here from the Mongabay for inviting me to this August panelist. And after, I think it's very difficult to speak after Kavi Kumar sir and Dr. Devajit. But I will try to probably take threads from what both of them spoke. I mean, Professor Kavi Kumar of course spoke about the development debate, that the resource first theory, that when you have a lot of resources, then you probably don't talk more about the value addition, and the states which were resource scarce would talk about that, and probably those who have the primary resources would end up selling those resources at a lower price, whereas the greater value addition happens elsewhere. I mean, the problem which we are discussing here, that why why is the renewable energy sector has not gone so well in the poorer states compared to the richer state. It is something which actually has to do with Professor Kavi Kumar again has mentioned about because of the potential. So the thing which you need to see first, which states to have the potential, and as Kundan was mentioning in the beginning itself, that the 8 states account for 80% of the installation. But if you see the potential also, I mean that's what you get in the Ministry of New and Renewable. In terms of potential, also the top 8 states have 70% of the potential. So they are basically going as per the potential. If you mention about Kerala, mention about Odisha, or mention about other states, they don't have the high potential to start with. So that's how that is one way of looking at it. Of course, Dr. Devajit has already given that the state story also vary in terms of the kind of institutional setup in those states, or the kind of willpower also among the officers to implement renewable in a greater scale. So what, of course, Dr. Devajit was also mentioning about, like farming states going high in electrification. I mean, of course, again, if we understand our country's electrification policy, from 1947 till 1997, that is 50 years, the 5 decades of independence, we had the village electrification definition, which didn't include the inhabited locality phrase into the definition. In the sense, the whole national electrification policy was geared towards energizing the pump sets. And that's how, what explains that why Punjab and, states where agriculture was prominence was the ones which went ahead. I mean, if we talk about this problem of mismatch between the potential and the program, I think it has to be looked at from 2 other perspectives, not from the perspective of the rich state and poor state. I mean, I don't mind if rich states actually implements very well. Let the rich state get solar energy from, and let the state actually get the conventional electricity which they deserve and which they have not got for so many years, and there have been high load shedding and various other kind of electricity problem they usually traditionally face. Let the richer state get those renewables, and then the conventional electricity available for the poor state. I think the story also can be seen, I mean, compared to rich state and poor state, is a story from the rural urban. I mean, if you see, compared to the rural push which we have done with the renewables, sometimes it with, lot of barriers in terms of remoteness of the place where the systems actually becoming dysfunctional after a few years of installation, and then lack of human resource capacity, lack of supply chain, leading to a graveyard of technologies. That is one part of it. And then also urban areas, which actually people where we are sitting, all of us. I mean, we don't know if the electricity we receive, where from it is coming. I mean, but whereas in rural areas, we expect the villagers themselves to be, community-based energy, producers of energy, managers of energy, etc., etc. Whereas, we treat the urbanites as consumers. Where also, I think, something which we need to see, the renewable implementation in that light. Why I'm saying urban areas have better ecosystem for renewable, because of their access, their human resource capacity, the security to the system which is needed, because typically solar will be always in the open. And also, I think this issue has to be seen from the perspective of household vis-a-vis institutes. I mean, I think being and systems which requires investment and which requires an ecosystem for sustenance, which is new, and therefore I think has to be implemented in areas where the area can actually take care of the system in the long run. So it is more like, urban first, rural latter, more like, institutes first, household latter, and more like, if you want to say, probably rooftop first, because that is about, utilizing your idle rooftop spaces, and the utility scale latter, because utility scale would require a lot of land, and that would require also transfer of land from the farmers to the industrialists, which anyway government is already accused of being an agent of doing that. And so therefore, I think we need to look at this problem from these perspectives, rather than a rich state, poor state story. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Nathan, for completing your perspective in time. Yeah, so that is quite again a different perspective. You don't want to, like you suggest us to see it in a rural versus urban perspective, or household versus institutes, and then you also discussed about the electrification policy for like decades. Yeah, but like okay, I will come to the discussion next phase. Before that, I would request Gopi to share his perspective.
Thank you, Kundan. You know, like a journalist, I would like to sort of talk about it from a linkages perspective and how we see it. So let me start with my personal understanding and from where what I understand. Two states where I understand fairly well are Tamil Nadu and Kerala. The electrification and the energy profile, etc. So I will talk about these two states in depth and build it forward. But before that, I just wanted to juxtapose a certain other data to the data that Kundan gave. Kundan spoke about 8 states which are on top of the solar energy the pile, and he said Rajasthan, Karnataka, Maharashtra, Gujarat, Madhya Pradesh, Tamil Nadu, Telangana, and Andhra Pradesh. Now, I just juxtapose the ranking, the SDG ranking that each of these states have got, the SDG ranking put out by Niti Aayog into 2021. So now SDG is, I mean, I know SDG is not exactly an indicator for economic growth, but SDG is certainly an indicator, a quasi indicator or a proxy indicator for growth. So let us look at it. I mean, Tamil Nadu is number two in the pile of is the second best in terms of SDGs. Telangana is 3 in SDGs. Andhra Pradesh is 5 in SDG. Karnataka is 4. Maharashtra is again 5. Rajasthan is 14, and Madhya Pradesh is 15, and Gujarat 9. Now, the point is, I mean, so what I'm trying to ask is there a certain linkage between states which have a higher SDG and they're more prone, they're more accessible to renewable energy growth. Now, the point is, I mean, if this argument was so simple, life would have been easy, but unfortunately not, because Tamil Nadu, as I said, is number 2 in SDG. So is Kerala. Kerala and Tamil Nadu have similar SDGs. They're next to each other, just a mountain range separating the two of them. But when it comes to their offtake, their absorption of renewable energy, clean energy, Tamil Nadu is far ahead of Kerala. Now, why does that happen? And that's where I'm trying to get into it from my my experience perspective. So, in 1992, I moved to Chennai from Delhi and working for Down to Earth magazine, and then later for around 10 years with Hindu Business Line newspaper covering environment. I had this area of renewable energy in Tamil Nadu quite seriously. Now, among the earliest stories I did those days were Tamil Nadu's wind power program, and Tamil Nadu was the leader those days on wind power. And wind power was the main renewable energy in the early 90s. Solar came later. Now, one of the reasons why Tamil Nadu already had a good manufacturing base. Tamil Nadu was known as a manufacturing sector. And many of the manufacturing units started there because there was already there's a built-in capacity in and around Chennai and in other industrial estates. So if you remember, among the earliest wind power manufacturer had his assembly or manufacturing unit just near Chennai Vestas RRB. No, so that sort of built onto the fact that Tamil Nadu had those gaps those gaps in the mountain, and that's where the earliest wind farms were. Muppandan and Kayantar, they both sort of relate to two mountain gaps. The first monsoon winds pass through those gaps, get accelerated, and there's a high wind potential. The other gap, the third gap between Kerala and Tamil Nadu, the Palakkad gap, that also has wind turbines. But Palakkad gap is not as productive as the other Muppandal and Kayathar, broadly because the Palakkad gap is too broad. I mean, it's around 30 kilometers broad. So you have smaller gaps which have a funneling action, and that becomes good for wind energy. So you had the physical benefit that Tamil Nadu had, but let us imagine if the situation was reversed, in the sense that if the predominant wind was from northeast and north southwest, and that means Kerala could have got the benefit of all this. If that was the case, would Kerala have taken so much of benefit from wind energy as Tamil Nadu did? Perhaps the answer is no. Now, there the answer is not just the question of the physical, factors. Here's the factor of the climate, the history, and the climate of industrialization, the climate of trust, of building industries, supporting industries, which translates into the manufacturing sector and a new sector, and also a greater climate for the consumers. Consumers to buy this energy. I mean, even if they were to, even if they had to pay a premium, with load shedding, etc., which had come. I mean, even if they had to pay a premium, but the fact is they can get reliable power. I mean, a Tamil Nadu customer is more willing to pay that and take it rather than a Kerala customer. So that was that. So broadly, even if you were to say states which have had other development factors more, where more, we're taking the, assimilating renewable energy more. But despite that, some states do not take as much as the other because they've had factors which are much more deeper, historical, so like the social, like Kerala and Tamil Nadu. So that, I think, is one area which we have been looking into, and that's the classic question we have been asking, and internally within Mongabay-India, and that's how Kundan started this discussion. How are certain states, I mean, because of the historical factors, they haven't had the growth in the development parameters. Is it because of that their offtake is less in renewable energy? And possibly yes, because even if these states were to be supplied, if the center was to go ahead and get green bonds and supply money to DISCOMs, what is the capacity of some of the less developed states DISCOMs to pick up that money and use it to improve their governance? Because so a whole lot of historical questions also come into it. So I'm so happy that Kundan has started this discussion, and I hope to learn more as we go along.
Thank you, Gopi. Thank you, Gopi, for sharing your perspective. You talked about the better ecosystem as you compared from Tamil Nadu, from Kerala, and then you compared SDG ranking and renewable capacity. I am now from here onwards, I will go into this question answer. But before, I would like to give one perspective. Like when we are talking about the historical context about the industry and economic condition of a individual state, and then what we are trying to understand these facts with the just transition aspect. Because this is the opportunity, this is the when the country is pushing, or not country, when the whole world is pushing for movement towards the renewable energy. This is an opportunity to correct the wrong what has been done in past. So with this context, we are trying to understand that whether this will be the vicious cycle like Bihar. Take the example of this state. What India has a per capita energy consumption in 1991. Bihar has not achieved it even in 2022. So if for this particular consumption, low consumption, Bihar does not get the capacity addition in present or in coming future, how it will translate for it in, again, 20 years, 30 years down the line. So to understand these things, again, and then government has shared a data. It says that it was released in 2019. This is about the per capita electricity consumption. And Bihar was again on the bottom of the list with 311 kilowatt per hour. Those states that have added less than 1,000 kilowatt, sorry, those states which have the 1,000 kilowatt of per hour per capita consumption, electricity consumption, it includes Uttar Pradesh, Kerala, West Bengal, Jharkhand, Meghalaya, Assam, Manipur, Nagaland, Tripura, and few others. What I mean to say here, like Kerala falls in this category. Despite this SDG, high SDG ranking, when it comes to the energy consumption, it is quite low. So again, with this fact, my question is that on one hand, we keep cherishing lower tariff solar, what it is getting in like after every few months, we get news that it has achieved something new. And on the other side, we see that those states which are comparatively energy poor do not get sufficient attraction of industry or investors. How to see this paradox in new emerging scenario, and what government should do, or we should just leave it on industry to move forward? These are the questions. I'll first ask Dr. Palik to respond to.
Thank you. So I think while it is important to consider the per capita energy consumption as a metric to determine some of the things that is being done by the government, but probably it doesn't tell the entire story, because now energy efficiency is also equally important. So if you are converting all the say the incandescent bulb into LEDs, so energy consumption is not going to increase, but it will give much better output. This one, so all households have been electrified or rather almost all households has been electrified in Bihar or in Uttar Pradesh or in Orissa, Jharkhand, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the energy consumption is increased. This one, no. So industry, so these states are mostly the residential energy consumption is a major pie in the total energy consumption, whereas states like Gujarat or Maharashtra and others, the industrial energy consumption is a major pie in the energy total energy consumption. So unless the industries are set up in these eastern states, the per capita energy consumption is not going to increase. But if you take the residential energy consumption of say Uttar Pradesh and residential energy consumption of a village in Maharashtra, there may not be too much difference. Of course, there will be some difference because the income is a criteria which determines the type of appliances one is using in their house. But there may not be major differences. But because the industries are set up are more in these states, these industrial states, the overall energy per capita energy consumption is much higher in these states. So I think there will be from a governance point of view and from a political governance point of view, I think the state has to make schemes for more industrialization in these states, so as to impact the energy consumption also. And that's something totally different and different type of administrative measures have to be taken. I'm not going into that this one. But yes, the energy consumption has to increase. The other point is that again we tend to believe that HDI is directly linked with say per capita energy consumption. The higher the per capita energy consumption, higher would be the HDI. Not necessarily this one. So we don't have any foolproof evidence to say that the causality is from HDI to higher per capita electricity consumption or vice versa, because the HDI consists of many other parameters. This one, of course, those institutions or those infrastructure would also need energy. But it may not be the case. I feel it may not be the case. You gave an example of Kerala. I think this one, which is a good example. This one, but of course, yes, we have to see that the HDI also increases, and at the same time, the per capita energy consumption in the form of a better outcome is also this one is progressing than just merely considering the input energy.
Thank you, Dr. Palit. So now I will ask Dr. Kumar to how to take this vicious cycle, how to understand it, and what could be the possible for it coming future.
Sorry, you're asking me?
Yes.
Sorry, I didn't catch your time. Okay. No, I think I agree with Abhijit that the energy consumption per capita may not be a right approach. I'm responding to the previous one first, because it's a lot more complex than what the per capita consumption will tell us. One, of course, the energy efficiency issue is very crucial for us to keep in mind, and we don't want to kind of think that higher energy consumption automatically means better living standard and so on. We want de-link that, and so we should be looking for de-linking of that definitely. I actually take to the specific point of how do we break this vicious cycle. I take the lead from exactly what Dr. Nathan was saying on why can't we live with the reality that we are facing right now? Why should we actually take complete advantage of this window of opportunity, quote unquote? Yes, this is a good window of opportunity. It's a window of opportunity. So we should be availing it, but we should not be actually thinking that this is the only one. We had several other windows of opportunities in the past. We missed this bus, not necessarily because we were unaware of them, but there were several other inherent institutional deficiencies in the so-called poorer states. So it's okay with the fact, probably, if we are actually over pushing this clean energy transition to the not so ready states, we might be ending up with inefficient solutions. In the sense that we will create the capacity, but we won't have the outcomes energy format. So we will simply have installed capacity, but no proper low carbon energy transition happening. So I would argue, and as I was about to say that, and Dr. Nathan said it, so I'm glad that we have the same view on this, that let the cleaner energy be enjoyed with the so-called richer states. Let the poorer states continue to face or in fact benefit out of what they have been denied so far. They have been not having the access to the energy that they actually produce. They have been denied, in fact. So let's actually live with the reality like that, because transition is not going to completely eliminate the fossil fuels. We are not talking about complete elimination of fossil fuels anyway. So probably this is a win-win situation in some sense. These states currently that we are resource rich and also depend a lot on the coal have low skill sets. So even if we thrust upon them all these solar and other options, they may not be able to be finding livelihood opportunities. You will end up actually facilitating a lot of migration from other states to these states, which is again going to be not a very interesting and appropriate situation to face. So probably I would underplay this window of opportunity business. We do want to recognize this as an important window, but let's not force it. Let's not. We have this tendency in India to be equitable for everything. So let's not do that indiscriminately. Is what. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Kumar, for sharing your. And I'll request Dr. Nathan to, if he has any response to this question, please share it.
Yeah. So just one more spin to this thing is the model, the model of energy implementation that a state adopts. And if you compare, of course, firstly, I do agree, completely to the point that, if you actually we plot HDI vis-a-vis per capita income, and then, okay, we might have a good correlation in the initial stages of income, but after a while, HDI become a normalized index, it will have its, it's basically the T2 taper off. But again, this is something therefore the correlation. I mean, there can be country which can, or the regions which can be, or sub-regions which can be, or sectors which can be very, very highly energy intensive, whereas some can be, energy efficient. I mean, that's for the efficiency which, Dr. Debajit was mentioning is quite right. And yeah, so the one more point, I mean, of course, is to the model. If you just one example is that the energy, renewable energy in the agriculture sector, where between Gujarat and Maharashtra, you will find that in Gujarat, the model which was initially proposed was a farmer level model. In fact, the village of Dundi, which is just a few kilometers from away from Anand, which actually claimed to be the world's first solar cooperatives, where actually some farmers got together to have a farmers level solar system, and thereby grid connected system, thereby actually generating enough power for their own pump sets, as well as also exporting power to the grid and actually having an income. Whereas you might know, Maharashtra actually went for a different model. The central government came out with a model. In 2017, Maharashtra came out with Mukhyamantri, Soros Bahini Yojana. I mean that MSKVY. So in that model, the solar plants were installed at the feeder level. Okay, in the sense you have a rural, at the substation level, the solar plants are installed. So the farmers don't have to do anything. The farmers continue to have, the same way, but the only thing now is that at the daytime, the kind of load shedding they used to face, I mean, because the solar is now at the feeder level, that daytime power they used to get, and that is basically, so they don't have to change their pump, they don't have to do anything. Only thing is that they may get more, more reliable power during the daytime. And also that model, I mean, of course, in a recent study, we are trying to look at how effective that model has become, but then it is expected that that model would be probably a model which can sort of itself quite rapidly, because this has to be, the public-private partnership will happen, the private players will come and install those care of the system and have an agreement, long-term agreement with to provide the power at a agreed rate. So also, I think, because we are bringing in the state stories, I mean, two states in solar might actually adopt a different kind of model, and that might actually result into the different kind of achievements they might have in this context. I was giving an example of solar in the interface of agriculture. So yes, I mean, so this can be another way of course looking at it. And of course, one more point I want to say, because you have raised the Kerala thing. Of course, Kerala is that puzzle that you actually have a very low consumption of energy, which Dr. Debajit has already mentioned about lower industrialization. And also, if you go in, I mean, this is basically anecdotal. The limited opportunities I had to go to Kerala, and I have seen the kind of efficient use of even lighting. You will find most of the, big hoardings are not there, etc. The overuse of lighting is not there. Even in the houses, I mean, you will not identify there is a house because there are so much of. One reason is the lighting is not so much, and the second is there are a lot of plants around their homestead, and that's how you don't get that whether there is a house, beside the road. And secondly, every market you go, every small to small vendor you meet, they are using LEDs. Okay, which is not there in UP, Bihar, Odisha. I mean, you will find still we are using incandescent bulbs in the rural and the informal sector. So this is what is actually the reason why Kerala has a very low consumption with the, and also they have leapfrogged. I mean, again, so far I have because I was in National Institute of Advanced Studies prior to IRMA, and we have a lot of Keralites coming to NIAS and IISc. I do interact, and they say in our household we also leapfrog, in the sense from kerosene stove we have gone to direct induction cooker. I mean, we have leapfrog to technologies, and that has happened again. This is a good education, good awareness, the good human development, and actually contributed to efficient use of energy. So they are basically aware about the menace of the indoor air pollution, and therefore they have actually chosen an efficient, energy efficient path rather than actually following the same trajectory that other states are following. Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Nadu. Gopi, would you like to share your view on this?
Yeah, thank you, Kundan. Actually, this is something again very interesting because I've been as a journalist, I was doing a lot of reporting from Kerala at a very critical time, 1996, 95, 96, when Kerala launched the God's Own Country campaign, tourism campaign. And it was very interesting because I mean, we were following it from an environment perspective, and it was very interesting because it was a very well thought through campaign. It was not something that was driven overnight. So this was a very thought through campaign, and it was directed at the middle to upper level, upper paying foreign tourists. It was not directed to the backpackers, because backpackers had been coming to Kerala for a very long time, and the per capita recovery from the backpackers had been low. So the Kerala's tourism minister was on record at a press conference in Chennai, and he said, see, why should I pay for a backpacker to come to my state and drink from my tap and eat my ration rice? So I mean, he was saying it very graphically, but then the point is, so it was a very well targeted strategy at that particular point of time, to get higher paying foreign tourists to come. Later, of course, today, if you look at the statistics, I mean, it's not 1 by 4. I mean, when it started, 1 rupee out of every 4 rupees came from foreign tourists. Today, it is 1 out of 11. So 10 to 11 would come from Indian domestic tourists, because domestic tourists have also become well paying, and they started coming to Kerala. Now the point I'm coming to. So when you say, and why did Kerala in 1996 go for tourism as a revenue model? Because there was a serious top up, and there were serious discussions. The LDF was in power at that time, and there were serious discussions in the state on what to take. And one of the things was either tourism or industrialization. And Kerala opted to go away from industrialization and go for tourism. And that's interesting, because when you talk of per capita consumption being low, energy consumption being low, it sort of turns out that this decision is more or less a decision by choice. I mean, Kerala has not gone the industrialization path, so per capita consumption is low. It has no bearing on the other consumption pattern in Kerala. So if you were to look at the automobile sales figures, Kerala perhaps must be having the highest consumption rate in four-wheelers, two-wheelers, white goods, fabrics, etc., gold, say. So I mean, it's got nothing to do with the regular consumption pattern of an average Keralite. But the energy consumption is low because that is more of a choice that the state had made at a particular point of time. And because of the choice that the state had made at that particular point of time, the focus on whole series of requirements for energy has also become lesser. So Kerala is one of the states which is discussing very, very strongly on rooftop solar, because that serves Kerala's purposes. Because you would be talking about utility scale. I mean, one, of course, finding that kind of space in Kerala is difficult, but more than that, also getting that kind of people who would buy that kind of utility scale power, it's more appropriate to get rooftop solar. So very interesting, conflicting views that some of these discussions are throwing up. Kundan, back to you.
Thank you, Gopi. My next question will be for Professor Kumar. Sir, you are saying you would like to underplay this conflict what we have raised that way, but I just want to understand how it will be translated for a common man there in Bihar. If we take example of Bihar, and How like see government has just come with the green hydrogen policy, and there they have given a sort of a leeway or some sort of scheme, like for 25 years you can there will be no transmission charge for renewables. If you want to use the renewable, that renewable will be used by government hypothesis for the production of green hydrogen. But it is for the 25 years. First, who will be going there in Bihar to produce hydrogen? Second, why, if they don't come, how, like, will, like this, if this transmission is free for 25 years, whether that will be free forever? If it is not free forever, will Bihari, one Bihari will have to pay more as compared to the person in Rajasthan or Madhya Pradesh? So how it will translate to a common man that way?
Thank you. I think the way in which the capacity additions are being made need not necessarily reflect in the final consumption. Consumption prices, because it's we are talking at multiple levels actually in this discussion. Probably it's the way in which we have structured it, and also very quickly we are trespassing several things. For instance, the distributed capacity addition, like the rooftops and so on, is quite different from utility level. I mean, also we are assuming very conveniently for our discussion right now that all the utility level solar can be easily kind of fungible with the other power generation. That's not true. We need extremely flexible distribution systems. I mean, not distribution, but at the stage of, say, for instance, just to give you a quick idea, like a peak load, for instance, happens in the evenings in most places when the lighting and other loads come on board. And most power, the power boards and electricity boards actually meet that peak load by quickly moving on to the ones which are easy to install, easy to start. And solar is not such thing. Even though you install a huge capacity, you cannot quickly start whenever you want. It comes when it is there, and you have you need an extremely flexible systems to actually utilize that so generated power. And so it's not going to be so easy. So the same thing when you come to the issue of like the capacity addition to the final consumer level prices. We're really, again, assuming that wherever the capacity is there, automatically the prices might come down. May not be the case. So you can have a less, let's say, disturbed, without any breaks, you may have the power supply in a high capacity region because you have uninterrupted supply and so on. But prices need not necessarily come down because remember also that the PV capacity within the country is very poor. We don't actually, we depend a lot on the imports still, and the type of increase that we are talking about, capacity increase that we are talking about, I don't know where the manufacturing is going to happen. And we haven't talked about that, like the PV cells and the panels. We are still depending largely on outside. Who is going to supply all this huge increment? And that's going to not come at a cheaper price. So right now we are seeing the prices maybe on the at an advantageous level, but in the long run, my hunch is that you may actually not see so much advantageous situation for the solar either. Like it's not that those prices are going to constantly keep falling. You will have to hit the resource constraint at some point, in the sense that there is a life cycle cost also attached to these solar panels, and we are not currently accounting all that. While we do talk about life cycle cost of the coal and other fossil fuels, but we are not talking about the solar as it. And so these are aspects which eventually play their role, and especially with the kind of a huge capacity expansion that we are talking about, we still don't know. I mean, my fingers are crossed on whether we actually can manage to reach those capacity expansion levels and all. This is on paper right now, because whether we can reach that level or not is still a questionable thing. Even if you are assuming, my point is that we may not see a dramatically different consumption level prices between the traditionally fossil fuel rich states and non-so low carbon energy states. That's my take on this. Thank you.
Okay. My next question will be from Dr. Padit. Basically, the World Bank has come with a new report called Global Photovoltaic Power Potential by Country. That gives perspective which country has a better solar potential. So when like in our discussion in last 1 hour, we have been talking about few states having better solar potential. So this report says that few African countries except South, not few, all African countries except South Africa, and then Bangladesh, Indonesia, all these countries have better solar potential. But the value addition, the capacity addition is happening there in Germany, in United States, in Japan. So and if we just take this learning, because we don't have any literature or develop an understanding in India, we just, if we execute or we just use this study to understand what is happening in India, do we think Bihar, obviously we can say Bihar has a limited solar potential, but as compared to Germany, it will be higher. So are we seeing the similar divide in within the India, and with the federal structure and major decision coming from center, how to make sense of it?
Yeah,
Dr. Pali.
so yes, absolutely. So you rightly mentioned about the different states. So I think India could be called God's own country, at least in the renewable energy, this one, resource availability. So probably except few states here and there, smaller states here and there, which are this one, almost the entire country has sufficient solar radiation to produce electricity. This one, maybe Rajasthan, Gujarat may have little higher potential, but then if you see the common denominator, then probably the entire country, all the states have potential, including in Ladakh, which many people might think that because this is a cold desert, so the solar potential would be low. Actually, Ladakh has a much higher potential than many of the other places in UP or Bihar and Rajasthan, because the temperature is exactly the same at which the production is high, and two, because there is no pollution, no dust pollution and other things, so the radiation intensity is much higher in Ladakh than many of the other places. This one. Now, the other thing is that if you take both solar and wind, and some data from Fraunhofer Institute and NREL and others, so they have come out with certain micro analysis, and they say that while during the daytime solar potential is there, and if we go through the data at the micro scale, then at different points or different hours during the night, the wind potential is also extremely high. So if you see it from combine both the things, the solar and the wind, and see it from a 24 hours cycle perspective, throughout the 24 hours, we have sufficient renewable energy resources which could be used to generate adequate amount of electricity that is needed for the country. We can add some more micro hydel and little bit of hydro here and there, and that is going to serve the purpose. Now the point is that how do you distribute it across the different states in the country? So we have this one grid concept which has already been there. So the power grid has put the grid across the different states, and all the 5 regional grids are interconnected. So that part is also there. It is not going to be a challenging task, this one. But yes, the central government has to drive this with the state and provide the necessary support to some of the states which are lagging behind, so as to bring them upfront. So, as I said in my opening remarks, some states are already very forward in taking forward the renewable energy initiative, but probably we need some of the states which have not done enough. The central government need to provide the necessary support to them. I'm not talking about just the financial support, but more importantly, the institutional support. You need to build capacity of the institutions that are there in those states like Bihar and Odisha, for them to leapfrog to the next level. This one. So there is a huge. So I feel there's a center-state joint effort in taking forward this initiative without going into the politics is extremely important, and that's how we can achieve whether you call it equality or equity, that's how we can achieve that. This one. So yeah. So both state and center has to work together. And given the fact that we are a federal in structure, I think that's extremely important.
Great. As you mentioned about the role of Central, Gopi, I have a question for you. You have been following the development since 1991, like when the climate change related conversation was mm, quite like it got a significance in the. So, and after that, number of policy interventions were made in India. You can take example of Biodiversity Act, or recently government announced net zero. Nobody was knowing in India whether government has made up its mind or not, but suddenly Prime Minister announced. And these kind of targets, 450 gigawatt, 175 gigawatt, do in a federal structure, center is taking call and making big targets. Do you think it is also hampering those states which are lagging in infrastructure and other equipment, other standards?
Thanks, Kundan. I mean, these targets will necessarily have to be taken by the center. I mean, the larger targets will necessarily have to be taken by the center, because these are the targets that India communicates to the UNFCCC, and that India is the party. Government of India is the party. It's not the state governments are not the party there. So India has to take that target. So there is nothing wrong in that. I mean, that is the right way to do it. I mean, Government of India should take these targets and announce them. No problem with that. The problem usually comes with how you, how this is then communicated to the states, and how this is communicated to the states, and is the way in which targets are divided equitable. I mean, that's the discussion we were going through, and Kavi's argument well taken. I mean, do we really need it to be equitable before energy poverty is taken care of? That argument being I totally agree with that argument. But the point there is not even that. It's one step beyond that. How is this communicated down to the states? In a federal structure, when you have a state government which has a different political party which is than the central government, and this political party takes a position that anything that the center says is we will do opposite that, or we'll take a position opposite that, then how do they accept it? I mean, one, even if that were to be coming, one, how is it being communicated? And two, even if it's being communicated, how is it being accepted? Now, the third point is, how is this communication process going forward, and how is this building beyond that? So, I mean, the argument is that you have a national plan to deal with climate change. You have a national plan, and national mission, etc., to deal with climate change, and to deal with at the state level, you have a state action plan for climate change. And we know at different states have different ways in which they have even worked on the action plans. And again, going back to the two states which I take as classic examples, Tamil Nadu and Kerala have totally different effectiveness in their action plan. Tamil Nadu has a reasonably effective action plan. What Tamil Nadu did was they went through a modeling process, a lower regional modeling process with the UK Met Office and the Center for Climate Change in Anna University, and they did climate modeling prognosis for Tamil Nadu. Now, many states don't even have that data. I mean, what is going to be the climate change model so you do that, and Tamil Nadu SAPCC says that the increase in temperature by 2100 would be 3.5 degrees centigrade, and it even marks the districts. It says Kanyakumari would have among the maximum increase in temperature. So that is the level of thinking that has gone into the climate change SAPCCs. And this is what will reflect in the way that the state government understands and appreciates India's commitments in terms of renewable energy transition. And this is what you see on ground. And this is what is the communication that is happening towards district collectors and people beyond, and the state energy development agencies, etc. And their agency, now I use the word agency as a verb, their will to do things. But just on the other side of the Western Ghats, in a state, Kerala, which has 100% literacy, we are proud about. But the state action plan is not anywhere as effective as Tamil Nadu. And that also reflects in the way Kerala is thinking about renewable energy, because you can't separate all this as part of a common framework. I mean, a state which takes its action seriously also takes energy transition seriously. It's very unlikely that a state which takes its action plan seriously doesn't take energy transition seriously. Or it's very unlikely a state doesn't take its action plan seriously but takes energy transition seriously. So this is all part of the larger, what we could call ecosystem of. So that is where the problem arises from. And it's not a question of whether the center should be taking this decision, or should center be discussing with states before it goes to. No, center has the right to take that decision and communicate it. But the point is, how do you communicate after that? And how does it work out after that? That becomes the issue.
Now we have few questions from audiences as well. So our senior colleague Mayank has he has been spearheading our energy transition and clean energy reports.
Can I just intervene a bit here?
Hello.
This is Kavi here. Can I just intervene and respond?
Yeah. Please.
Okay. Now, thanks, Gopi, for mentioning this point about the communication. I also would like to add there that even for forming the targets, I think there should be a consensus. It is, of course, as central government's prerogative to communicate to the UNFCCC, but I don't think it can unilaterally form these targets without having consensus developed with the states. Right now, there seems to be I know the thing, so I'll first fix it, then I'll communicate it to you. Probably, maybe that's not going well with the federal structure again. Second point on the state action plans, I think there is also a tendency among the states right now, Tamil Nadu, Kerala distinction apart, to see the climate change as the holy cow. So let's try and milk it as much as possible. Probably that's not the right approach if you want to see eventually and take climate change as a serious problem. And I'm not picking any particular state to highlight this thing, but probably there is that tendency, the one who are actually rushing forward are rushing not forward with the concern for the future alone. They're rushing forward to grab as much as possible in the immediate future and use that as the mechanism to kind of enhance their welfare. Nothing wrong in itself, in it a short-term target, but in the long term, probably it's not the right approach, especially if you're dealing with the climate change.
Can I quickly make a point? Just very tempted to make a point on what Gopiji made. I think again, it's just a food for thought. I think similar to the GST Council, I think we need to form a net zero by 2070 council, where the state and the central would have equal voice, and each one have to, the communication should be a two-way communication. It cannot be a one-way communication. It's fine, the central government has set a target based on the global pressure by net zero by 2070. But to achieve it, I think the state has an equal role to play. And if the state has to play its role, then there should be a forum where all states can discuss how to achieve that and how one state can help the other state in terms of sharing the best practices and knowledge and so on and so forth in achieving that by 2070. So maybe a council similar to that, which can take an integrated approach, might be helpful.
Actually, can I half a second? It's very interesting because one of the documents that the COP26 threw out, which came during the COP26 was UK government's internal discussions on UK's net zero announcement. So there were this discussion. There was an entire document by by the Treasury Department, the finance ministry, on what are the implications. So this is a document with broken down what are the implications of net zero in the public domain. We certainly haven't seen any such document or any such breakdown or any such explanation of why net zero by 2070 and what are the steps forward, etc. We haven't seen anything in the public domain, and certainly I suppose even state governments have not seen, and perhaps state governments were not asked also before the announcement was made. Thank you, Kavi, and thank you, Devjit, for making that point. Thank you.
So now we'll be taking few questions from audiences. Mayank has asked, everyone talks about megawatt and gigawatts, but no one is bothered about the people, especially women, whose life directly or indirectly depend on energy projects. In that context, what happened to them and their welfare during this dynamic that plays out between energy poor states and western plus southern states? Can I request Dr. Nathan to respond to this question?
Well, see, what happens to the woman is more about not a state story. Again, it's about more of a household story. Okay, so in the household, particularly in the remote locations and in the villages, obviously it is it has been seen if you look at the literature empirically, it has been seen the female-headed households are the ones who adopted the modern technology at a faster rate. I mean, this is what we tell it in the case of classic failure of public policy when we talk about the kerosene subsidy. Whether some of you might know that kerosene was subsidized. Kerosene was subsidized as a clean cooking fuel. But if you look at the data, less than 1% of the households actually used kerosene as a primary cooking fuel. So I mean, why it is so, if you ask? Obviously, one hand, it was like firewood was available seemingly free, and which actually the girls and the women were the ones who were doing the back job, which the patriarch family never recognized. And on the second hand, the electrification rate was slow. I mean, household electrification was never a priority, as other speakers have also said. Our energizing pump set was the priority since independence. So that actually led to kerosene being used as a lighting fuel, and as well as almost 50% of that got adulterated as a cheap transportation fuel, both creating one hand indoor air pollution and other and local air pollution. So obviously the gender story to energy is that you bring in efficient devices, you bring in efficient carrier, you bring in efficient services. I think female are the ones who are going to adopt it the first, because they are the custodian of energy. They are the major benefactor, because they are currently the major victims.
Ritesh has asked, can energy storage infrastructure reduce this inequality of energy installation among the states? Can I request Dr. Palit to respond to this question, or any of the experts?
Yeah, so energy storage infrastructure, again, it's all the same. That means whether you put up a renewable energy infrastructure or the energy storage infrastructure, one, you need infrastructure investments. The private sector has to come in, or the government has to or the central government has to provide the money. Probably the state doesn't have that type of money to put up infrastructure because they're more busy with other basic necessities. This one. So I think that means it is not directly going to address the challenge unless the overall challenge is addressed. This one, whether it is a renewable energy infrastructure or you call it energy storage infrastructure, it's a part of the overall renewable energy infrastructure only. Yes, of course, some decentralized renewable energy options could be used, and for say taking this energy poverty or energy poor states agenda forward. But then I'm happy that I think a couple of weeks back in one of the speech address, the Honorable Prime Minister did mention that every household should have his own energy source. I hope the government will come out with certain schemes to also include decentralized renewables, along with the utility scale solar, which is being pushed now.
Third question, like Abhishek has asked, what stops RE poor states to procure cheap RE power from RE rich states with interstate transmission charges being waived. Is the lack of transmission infrastructure the key cause, or there is more to it? I would like to add one more line to this question. Like government has set an RPO obligation for every states, and these are the states like Bihar, UP, and other states and what we have mentioned so far. They are into the legal battle to and asking government to waive off from these RPO obligation for certain years. So, what is stopping these states to buy power, renewable power from other states? What are the issues? Any expert?
Can I take it?
Yeah, please.
Yeah. So I think nothing is stopping them. This one fundamental problem is challenge is that the financial condition of the distribution utility, which is the agency who would be procuring all these things, all the energy. Now, if you have a utility in Bihar or Odisha or any other place which is, or in Jharkhand, which is not doing well, so they don't have the money to procure it, and they have also entered into long-term power purchase agreement with the coal-based power plants, because many of the coal-based power plants are located in the state. So they probably get one as a means of royalty, some free power or something like that, or they might have entered into long-term power purchase agreement with the NTPCs and the central government undertakings that are located there. So, and they anyway have to pay to those coal-based power plant. The fixed cost have to be paid to them, whether you take or not take electricity from them. Only the fuel charges, if you're not taking, then you don't have to pay for the fuel charges. And the argument could be that why don't they then close this agreement with long-term agreement? But then the other side of the story would be that at some point of time, someone came forward and invested money in anticipation that for the next 20 years, I'm going to get a fixed amount against the electricity that I'm going to supply. Now, if you don't obey the agreements, then the renewable energy developers will also not come forward, because then the agreements if you are not accepting these agreements. So I think it's a complex process. Probably we need to think it in a different way. I think more important is to have the investment in those states, so that the investment will not only help in the states to generate their own power, but also economically develop the states. And in that process, the income will increase, and then they will be in a position to pay for the power that they are going to use in their homes. So that probably would be a more sustainable solution.
So I have two questions. One is from Alok. How current energy transition can change the scenario of cooking fuel in rural areas where wood and dung fuels are still dominant sources? I would like Professor Kumar to respond to this question. And one question I have, like I thought to discuss, and I'm not confident how it looks like. I was reading your research paper, and there I got this energy economy environment modeling. I was just thinking whether poverty ever gets factored into this modeling or not, and whether we see the future through these modelings. How, what exactly? So, Professor Kumar, if you can respond to these two questions.
Thank you. Thank you. I think first on the issue of cooking fuel issue, I think this is a completely different aspect. When we get into the renewables, it not necessarily automatically transform us from the so-called dirty fuels to clean cooking fuels. That's a much larger battle we have been fighting for several years, and continues to be. By the way, if you're not aware, it is one of the main killers in several countries, several developing countries, including South Asian countries. We don't realize it's a slow killer. So it's according to the World Health Organization, it's the main cause of death due to the indoor air pollution. So that story needs to be addressed through other clean fuel transition that's already being done through this Pradhan Mantri Ujjwala Yojana and other things. I mean, whether the electricity becomes the main source of cooking, I don't see that happening in India very soon. It could be fairly long term before we actually move into the electricity as the cooking fuel. We would be talking about transition to quote unquote less dirty fuels, which could be climate-wise still dirty fuels. Because if you get into the LPG, it doesn't mean that you're actually solving the climate problem. In fact, you are exaggerating the climate problem because you're moving from the so-called carbon neutral fuels to carbon intensive fuel, because firewood and so on, in some sense, could be actually carbon neutral, because you're absorbing during the sequestration, you're burning it and actually it going. But in the process of incomplete consumption, combustion, you end up creating more local environmental problems, and that leads to the health burden and so on. So we are addressing that through this transition from the less carbon intensive fuels to more carbon intensive fuel. So in a way, actually, we are adding to the carbon there. That's an important transition because of the health burden. And I don't think we could actually leapfrog into the Kerala model. It may not be so easy to replicate in other parts of the country, leapfrog completely into the, let's say, the cooking fuel being electricity. That's a fairly long time horizon option. The other issue about whether poverty features in the EEE models, it's an offshoot. And automatically, the moment you're talking about economy, outcomes of the economy, not necessarily simply you're looking at the GDP and the growth prospects alone, but you're also looking at poverty levels, employment levels. So all these aspects generally become, one of the recent papers looked at exactly the same question. I can actually put it on the, can I put it on the chat box here, the reference to that? I think I can put, but probably I'll give the reference to that. It actually looks at how the labor employment opportunities change across India with the transition to the clean energy, and especially what implications it has for the eastern states compared to the west and south. And it's a very detailed exercise coming from Potsdam Institute of Climate Impact Research, Dr. Malik and his colleagues have done. So several other studies exist, but where essentially these are the triple economy models. One of the component that they model in that would be the employment status as well as the poverty levels. I hope I answered your question.
Thank you. Yeah, definitely. And these are the I would like to thank all experts and panelists. Basically, we know that this is the question, a sort of hypothetical question. We begin writing stories from all states to see what is happening there. And we all know that journey has just begun. And because in this part of states, this part of country, Eastern and North India, energy conservation or energy or climate change is not even an issue for the discussion. So we have raised this, and we really got different perspective from all experts. I'd like to thank you all for getting time and sharing with you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Kundan. Thank you very much. Thank you, all the co-panelists.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you to organizers and giving this opportunity. Thank you very much. Nice to see you.
Yeah, nice to see you. Actually, we are having a private conversation here.
Thank you very much. Thanks to all.
Thank you, Gopi, for inviting me. Thank you very much. Thank you.